Om Namo Bhagwate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagwate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagwate Vasudevaya.
Sri Shukadev Goswami said, the Dichi Muni, the son of Atharva, thus resolved to give his body to the service of the demigods. He placed himself, the spirit soul, at the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and in this way gave up his gross material body made of 5 elements. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. As indicated by the words, Pare Bhagwati Brahmani Atmanam Sanayan, the deity placed himself as spirit soul at the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In this regard, one may refer to the incident of Dhritarashtra's leaving his body, as described in the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Dhritarashtra analytically divided his gross material body into the 5 different elements of which it was made: earth, water, fire, air, and ether, and distributed them to the different reservoirs of these elements. In other words, he merged these 5 elements into the original Mahatattva. By identifying his material conception of life, he gradually separated his spirit soul from material connections and placed himself at the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The example given in this connection is that when an earthen pot is broken, the small portion of the sky within the pot is united with the large sky outside the pot. Mayavadi philosophers misunderstand this description of Srimad Bhagavatam. Therefore, Sri Ramanuja Swami, in his book Vedanta Tattva Sasala, has described that this merging of the soul means that after separating himself from the material body made of the 8 elements, earth, water, fire, air, ether, falls into mind and intelligence, the individual soul engages himself in devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his eternal form. The material cause of the material elements absorbs the material body, and the spiritual soul assumes its original position. As described by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Divya Swarupaya Krishna Nityadas, the constitutional position of the living entity is that he is the eternal servant of Krishna. When one overcomes the material body through cultivation of spiritual knowledge and devotional service, one can revive his own position and thus engage in the service of the Lord. Evan Krita Vayavasito Yajnan Atharvanastanam Pare Bhagwati Brahmani Atmanam Samayan Jaho. So, the key point here is that the constitutional position of the living entity is that he is the eternal servant of Krishna. We see over here that the Dichi Muni has given up his body similar to the manner in which Dhritarashtra gave up his body. He has returned the different elements of the body to the sources such as earth, water, fire, air, ether. This can be done by one who is very elevated. However, reference is made in the purport to the Mayavadi concept that the living entity, after the termination of his body, becomes one with the Supreme. And in the purport, Prabhupada gives the example of the pot. The example given in this connection is that when an earthen pot is broken, the small portion of the sky within the pot is united with the large sky outside the pot. So, as explained in this purport, oneness in spiritual language means identifying with the desires of the Lord. Oneness in understanding the mission of the Lord. So when we talk about the devotee merging, actually what we are talking about is the devotee merging his ideas with the desires of the Lord, that is, the living entity engaged in the process of devotional service. So, as long as there is this identification with the body. As long as one is hoping to merge with the Supreme, the real Ananda bliss cannot be realized. Lord has innumerable transcendental characteristics, including the fact that He is eternal, full of knowledge and blissful. Satchidananda Vigraha and Vigraha. Vigraha means He has a form, not that the Supreme is void. And through the medium of the other transcendental paths like Brahman and Paramatma realization, one can realize the Sat and the Chit portions of the Lord. But the blissful Ananta portion of the Lord can only be realized if one takes to the process of devotional service. Therefore, it is being stated over here that this is the real activity of the living entity, and it is possible to engage in this process of devotional service through the cultivation of spiritual knowledge when one gives up his bodily identification. It is necessary that one gave up the identification with this body. In the Bhagavatam, there is a story of how the avdhoot Brahman, he met 9 different spiritual masters, and how the different spiritual masters advised him how sense gratification should be given up. Because being on the path of sense gratification means being on the path of obtaining misery one after another, and being on the path of devotional service means fulfilling one's constitutional position and realizing real spiritual bliss. And the nature of the spiritual bliss is that it never terminates. The materialist can never understand this concept. Just like last night also when we were on TV, we could see that the materialist can never understand that the termination of sense gratification results in a level of happiness that no amount of material activity can match. The devotees, they are not leaving behind anything. They are leaving behind something inferior for something superior. And because of something superior is able to sustain them and give them happiness, do they never return to the inferior activity that they have left behind. So, the story is that how the different spiritual masters advised us, avdhoot Brahman, how sense gratification should be given up. For example, the ocean was one of the spiritual masters of this Brahman. So the ocean warned this Brahman that one who wants to succeed on this spiritual path, his mind must be like that of an ocean. The beauty of an ocean is the water is always still. In the rainy season, the rivers, they discharge water. And in the hot season, the water is not discharged, but still the ocean is still. So the Transcendentalist is advised to control his mind, absorb his mind in the lotus feet of the Lord like the ocean, and not be disturbed when there is honor and dishonor, victory or defeat. One day there will be honor, another day there will be dishonor. This is mature world. There is bound to be duality. There cannot be perfection in the mature world. Just like sometimes people join the Krishna conscious movement and they say, oh, I'm noticing so many discrepancies in ISKCON also. So what's the value of my continuing in this movement? It is not that because one is in ISKCON that one will not notice any discrepancy at all. But one will not notice any discrepancy in the philosophy that is being presented. One will not notice any discrepancy in the interpretation of the Supreme Lord's teachings because Srila Prabhupada has done it very perfectly. So in the mature world, there is bound to be duality. There is going to be honor and dishonor. So the ocean has cautioned the Brahman that the mind should always be fixed. The Transcendentalist, he sees this mature world within the jaws of the serpent of time. The Transcendentalist doesn't see that this material world is something that he can enjoy eternally. He sees it within the jaws of the serpent of time, which means that he recognizes with the passage of time, everything is going to get destroyed. Something may be beautiful today, but with the passage of time, it's going to become ugly. So the spiritualist, because he views everything, this whole material universe, within the jaws of the serpent of time, he understands that there's no point in just increasing his connection with material existence. So the avdhoot Brahman has been advised that the mind should be just like an ocean, and there's a nice example cited in the Bhagwate of a person who was making an arrow. There was a person who was making his arrow, and he was so absorbed in making his arrows and making sure that the arrow was straight so it would be able to fulfill the purpose for it was being made, that right in the front of that man's shop there was a king passing by with his whole entourage. Generally a big personality doesn't walk alone. A big personality walks with his whole entourage. So the king was passing in front of the shop with his whole entourage and kettle drums and all. But the shopkeeper was so absorbed in making the arrows that he did not notice the passing of the king at all. So the Bhagavatam explains that similarly the devotee should be so absorbed in thinking of Krishna, in thinking of Krishna's instructions, that stand up or get out. That he should be so absorbed in the spiritual instructions, in meditating on the Lord's lotus feet, that in the dualities of the material world may present itself, but the devotee should not be affected by this at all. If one can control his mind, if one can meditate with his mind on the transcendental instructions of the Lord, the transcendental form of the Lord, then the avdhoot Brahman was advised that one can definitely succeed on the spiritual path. So the devotees, they have to become like the expert shopkeeper who was making his arrows. He was so absorbed in making his arrows that he did not notice the whole paraphernalia of the king passing by. So if we are absorbed with our mind, then the realities of material existence, they will not bother us at all. Then the moth also acted as a spiritual master of the avdhoot Brahman. The moth said that just like I get attracted to the glaring light and I go and sit on that light, then I get burned by the heat of that light. So similarly the living entity, he gets attracted. Sri Shankar, stand up. Alright. So similarly, the materialist, he gets attracted to the beautiful form of a woman or the ornaments of a woman. So the moth has cautioned the avdhoot Brahman that just like I get attracted to the glaring light of the glaring shining light of the bulbs, similarly the materialist, he gets attracted to the beautiful form of the woman. And when he gets attracted to the beautiful form of the woman that has ornaments in it, he loses the whole opportunity to engage in devotional service. We are talking about the importance of devotional service, but in order to be able to fulfill devotional service, in order to be successful on the path of devotional service, it is essential that these instructions which were given by the 9 spiritual masters to the avdhoot Brahman be kept in mind, because we may realize how important devotional service is, but if we cannot keep these instructions in mind, then we will not be able to succeed on the path of devotional service. So the instruction of the moth was that one should not become attracted to the form of a woman, even if the woman is very beautifully decorated with ornaments and with nice clothing. So similarly, the materialists, we see they're all being attracted to the opposite sex, and because they are being attracted to the opposite sex, they are unable to fulfill the real mission of human life. And then the elephant also acts like a spiritual master. As Sakya Pandit said, one should take gold from wherever he can get it. So the devotee, he takes instructions that are conducive for spiritual enhancement from any source that he can obtain it. So the elephant also gave instructions. The elephant said, it's just like the hunter, when he wants to capture me, he makes me follow the she-elephant. And when I have to follow the she-elephant, I end up falling in the ditch. So the elephant cautioned the avdhoot brahman that one who wants to succeed on the spiritual path, he should not get attracted to the opposite sex, because when a male is just busy chasing after the free will, he loses the intelligence by which he could have cultivated spiritual life. Then the python, it also gave instructions, and that is that in the meditation or the mentality of a devotee or one who is intelligent is that in order to maintain his body, he should not over-endeavor. In order to maintain his body, the python said, that one should just accept whatever comes on its own accord. And instead, the Transcendentalist should concentrate his attention in serving the personality of Godhead. This was the advice. And then the deer also acted as a spiritual master. The deer said that when the hunter wants to capture me, he comes and plays a particular melody. And then I go to hear that melody, and in the meantime I get shot. So it is explained in the purport that similarly the materialist or anyone who is attracted to mundane songs, anyone who is attracted to mundane music, he will just meet the same fate as that of a deer. This is a statement of the Srimad Bhagavatam that is not subject to dispute or interpretation. That anyone who is attracted to mundane sounds or mundane songs or mundane music will have to face the same fate as that of a deer who gets captured by the melody of a person playing music. And then the fish also acted as a spiritual master. The fish also spoke. The fish said that just like when someone comes fishing, I get caught by the fish hook that's baited. Similarly, the fish said that when people eat without discrimination, they also get caught in human civilization. There are some guidelines given as to what should be eaten and what should not be eaten. For example, in the Bhagwate, Krishna says, Patram, Puspam, Phalam, Toyam. He tells us what we can eat and what we cannot eat. But if we eat without discrimination, then naturally we have to pay a price. People think that they're relishing meat, but little do they realize, for every piece of meat that they eat, they have to take their birth equal to the number of hairs in that animal's body. This they don't realize at all. And also, from a material angle, there is no doubt, in fact there's enough scientific evidence to point out that meat is the major cause of most of the diseases. And not only is meat the major cause of the diseases, meat eating is also the cause of the starvation that is there on this planet. So many pounds of grains are used to produce 1 pound of meat. It is said that up to 28 pounds of grains are necessary in order to get 1 pound of flesh. So all this land that is being utilized to cultivate grains for animal consumption could easily be directed for producing foodstuff for human consumption. So look at it from many angles, spiritual or material, meat eating or eating of undesirable food is unnecessarily harmful materially, and it is also very, very sinful. And then the bee spoke. There are two types of bees, as we know. One is the bumblebee and one is the honeybee. So the bumblebee gave instruction how one should, how the Transcendentalist should live. The bumblebee said that the Transcendentalist should take the essence from all the scriptures and he should eat as he gets his foodstuff. If he doesn't get foodstuff at any time, for example, the Transcendentalist should just think that, oh, the Lord doesn't want me to eat today, so I won't eat. Not if he doesn't get some foodstuff, he begins to grumble. And then the honeybee said that one who's on the transcendental path, he doesn't like storing things. It is explained in the Bhagavatam that the container of the Transcendentalist is his stomach. But the stomach is the container of the Transcendentalist. Generally we have big containers to store and store a variety of things. But the stomach is the container of the Transcendentalist. That means he only eats as much as the stomach can hold. And he doesn't store beyond that. The Transcendentalist doesn't gather foodstuff and then store it. He only stores as much as the stomach can hold. This is his only container. Prabhupada used to very often give the example of if some grains were left on the road and if the birds were allowed to come and take the grains and human beings, if the birds were allowed to take, they would each come and take only as much as they could hold. But if the human being was given the opportunity, he would come and take as much as he could. He would store it. But the animals, the birds, they would only come and take as much as they could eat at that time. So the human being had become very greedy. This is the purport of the honeybee's instructions. That the materialist, he becomes very greedy and he tries to store more than he needs. And because he's always in anxiety about increasing his material possessions, he's always in anxiety about increasing his possessions, he fails to utilize the valuable human life for the purpose of spiritual realization. And these different instructions are very instrumental. There's also the story of Pingala. Pingala was a prostitute, and this prostitute Pingala was waiting, beautifully dressed up, all day for a customer. And she was waiting for a customer all day, and the customer did not come. Then in the night, she was so beautifully dressed up all day, she got so frustrated that she took out her beautiful ornaments and sari, and then she just concentrated in worshipping the Supreme Lord. So the Bhagavatam similarly explains that when the living entity is maintaining desires for sense gratification, or when he is contemplating about the sense gratification that he has engaged in, then he cannot engage in devotional service. Not only do we have to give up desires for sense gratification, but we also have to forget the sense gratification that we have engaged in. This is known as antuam. That is meditating on sense gratification that one has engaged in, or meditating on sense gratification that one will engage in. And as long as one is doing either of the two, meditating on sense gratification that he has engaged in the past, or meditate on sense gratification that he is looking forward to, the question of spiritual advancement just doesn't arise. So if we want to advance spiritually, we have to take lessons from this prostitute Pingala. Pingala, as long as she was dressed up very nicely in this nice dress with nice ornaments, she was in anxiety at every moment looking for a customer. But when she gave up her beautiful dress and the ornaments, she then gave up the anxiety or the thought of waiting for a customer, and she just engaged in devotional service to the Lord. So it is explained that the Transcendentalist similarly, he doesn't wait for the opportunity for sense gratification, like the prostitute was waiting for a customer. Because as long as you are contemplating any type of sense gratification, there cannot be spiritual happiness. Spiritual happiness will only be there if one becomes completely niskama, if one understands that the greatest source of happiness is engagement in devotional service. This firm conviction must be there that mature sense gratification at any time cannot satisfy the living entity. One of the obstacles to spiritual advancement is that even though one may not be engaging in sense gratification at the moment, still one meditates on the sense gratification that he is engaged in. We see that even within this Krishna conscious movement, some of the devotees may be meditating on the sense gratification that they used to engage in before coming to this movement. But that meditation also, the Bhagavatam explains, is detrimental to spiritual advancement. Because if you're contemplating on these activities of sense enjoyment that one is engaged in, then one begins to think that maybe he has left behind something that was valuable. Because one never thinks of something that is dirt. One never thinks of something that is filth. Like the Bhagavatam explains, one never thinks of the stool after one leaves the toilet. So similarly, sense gratification is just like stool that one leaves behind in the toilet. One should not meditate what he has done in the past, and one should not meditate about the future prospects of engaging in sense gratification. If one does either of the two, then devotional success becomes very, very difficult. So therefore, we have to make our mind like the ocean. We have to fix our mind like the shopkeeper who is making arrows walk. We have to absorb ourselves completely in the process of devotional service. This is absolutely essential if we want to succeed on this path. Prabhupada used to give the example that if a glass was full with water, then you can't add anything to it. Similarly, if the mind is full of spiritual instructions, if the mind is full of spiritual thoughts, then sense gratification that has been incurred, that one has experienced in the past, or one is aspiring to experience in the future, will not even come to one's mind. And when that is the stage of devotional service, that is known as the stage of MuktiPada. MuktiPada is a stage of devotional service when one is absorbed with his mind and senses just in serving the personality of Godhead. So this is the point that is being made over here, that one should engage in devotional service. Devotional service is described in all the scriptures as the most beautiful object. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita it is said, Purushata Shiromani Prema Mahadhana. That the greatest wealth is this wealth of love of God. This is the greatest wealth. And the devotee executing the path of devotional service, what is his position? His position is exactly like a bird caught in the net. Like the bird caught in a net. When the bird is caught in a net, it has no freedom. The bird is caught in the net. Similarly, the Bhagavatam explains, the devotee thinks that he is caught in the net of Krishna. And because he is caught in the net of Krishna, the devotee doesn't really have any independence. We see that there's a tendency that even after being in the movement to maintain our independence. But the Bhagavatam explains that the independent mentality for a devotee is spiritual suicide. The devotee thinks that he's just like a bird caught in a net. And the net is the net of devotional service. When the devotee is executing devotional service, he doesn't think he's independent at all. Just like we gave the example yesterday of the sloka or the bull. The bull has no independence. The bull is being controlled by the cart driver. When the car driver says stop, the bull stops and eats. When the car driver says go on, the bull has to go on. So similarly, the devotee is caught in the net of devotional service, and being caught in the net of devotional service means he's just interested in executing the process of devotional service without being affected by the happiness or distress, without being affected by any of the dualities that are bound to happen again and again. It is not that if somebody has experienced difficulty today, this difficulty cannot be experienced again. As long as one is in this material world, in this material body, there will be miseries that one has to face in a variety of ways. But the devotee, he understands that due to the causeless mercy of the Lord, the punishment or the suffering that he has experienced has been greatly minimized. The devotee has the firm faith that whatever the Lord does, he does it for the benefit of the individual. Just like in the story of the king and his prime minister. You remember that story? I think I told you once before. You all remember that? The king and the prime minister? The king could not understand how his prime minister had complete faith in God. I'll just repeat it fast. There was a king, and he had a prime minister who was completely Krishna conscious. And whatever would happen, the prime minister would just say, oh, this is the causeless mercy of the Lord that this has happened. My Lord can do no wrong. So the king had two of his fingers cut one day. And he went to the prime minister and said, why did God cut my fingers now? What wrong did I do? Just like on the TV last night, that man was asking, what wrong have I done that that's what God heard? So the prime minister said, it's the causeless mercy of the Lord that only two of the fingers got cut. And the king got so offended that the prime minister, instead of sympathizing, was just saying, oh, that's the right thing that happened. And he put the prime minister in jail. And the king, as the monarchs do, they go on hunting. The king was out hunting. And as he was out hunting, he got caught by a gang of dacoits. And the gang of dacoits brought the to the dacoit chief. And the dacoit chief was very happy that they got such a big victim, they caught a king. And the dacoit chief, because the dacoits they eat meat, they're also worshippers of Durga. And those who are less intelligent, this happens in India even now, they even offer human flesh to Durga. This has been prevailing historically for a long time. So the dacoit chief said, okay, this is such a big victim, we should not eat him, we will offer this to Durga. And the dacoit chief said, okay, before you offer it to Durga, just make sure that all the parts of the body are intact. Just like we offer fruits to Krishna. When we offer fruits to Krishna, we make sure that no one's eaten part of that fruit. If anyone's eaten part of the fruit, then you don't offer it to Krishna, isn't it? We make sure that it's untouched, unseen, untasted before offering it. So also, the demons also have a certain etiquette and certain standard. So the dacoit chief's standard was that to make sure that this person who was being offered to Durga, all the parts of his body were intact. So the dacoits searched in his whole body, and they found that two of his fingers were missing. So they came back to the dacoit chief and said, oh, we have bad news. Two of the fingers of this king are missing. And the dacoit chief said, oh, now you can't offer it to Durga. Two of his fingers are missing. So the dacoit chief said, let the king go. So then the king came back to the palace and he said, release the prime minister, release the prime minister. And they called the prime minister in, and he said, yes, what he said was the right thing. Whatever the Lord does, he does it for the benefit of his devotee. So if I would have had my two fingers, I would have been offered to Durga. And because I didn't have my two fingers, I was saved. And then the king said, but you are so intelligent, you have such strong faith in God, why did God get me to put you in the prison house? And the prime minister said, can't you think that if I would not have been in the prison house, I would have gone out hunting with you. And because all the parts of my body are intact, I will be offered to Durga. So the point is that the devotee, whatever the Lord does, he has a firm understanding that the Lord is doing it for his benefit. So this is the state of a MuktiPada, that is, he's engaging his mind, his body, his senses, always in the process of devotional service. So these instructions of the 9 gurus that we have just briefly discussed, these should always be kept in mind. The Transcendentalist, he doesn't play with spiritual instructions. Just like they say in the mature world, you don't play with fire. Because when you play with fire, there's danger that you may really burn yourself. When the mother sees a child near the fire, the mother pulls the child completely away from the fire, isn't it? Because at any time one will fall in the fire. So similarly, the devotee recognizes that if he plays with fire, at any time he can fall in the fire. So he doesn't even play with fire. And therefore, all the 9 gates in this body, they are completely illuminated with spiritual instructions. And if the 9 gates are illuminated with spiritual instructions, then there is no opening in the body for Maya to creep in. So these different senses and the mind is achieved because the mind is directing the different senses. If the mind is contemplating on sense gratification, then it will direct the legs, please walk to an area where I can get some sense gratification. It will direct the leg, let's go to the movie house, let's go here, let's go there. When the mind is saying, oh, let me satisfy the tongue, it will say, okay, let's walk to a restaurant and let me satisfy the tongue. So the mind is the representative of the Supreme Lord. This is the verdict of Kapila Dev. The mind is the representative of the Supreme Lord, and the different senses are the representatives of the different demigods. Therefore, the mind and the senses must be employed in the service of the Supreme Lord. Definitely, while controlling the mind and the senses, one has to undergo tapasya. But without tapasya, without austerity, without spiritual austerity, there is no question of making any spiritual advancement. Yukta vairaagya. The process of renunciation is that of yukta vairaagya. Yukta vairaagya means that one doesn't want to use anything for his own self, but one is willing to use everything for the service of the Lord. We are ready to beg for morning tonight, but for our own selves we don't want anything, but for the Lord we are ready to accept everything. This is known as yukta vairaagya. So we have to practice genuine yukta vairaagya. We have to practice genuine austerity. And when one abstains from the opportunity for sense gratification, though the opportunity may be there, but when one still abstains from sense gratification, that is known as tapasya. The Maharaj Vasudevay has instructed his sons that tapo divyam putraka yena satva, that one must undergo tapasya for the pleasure of Krishna. Just like Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma was instructing how the personality of Godhead, whose inconceivable can be understood. And he also says, Tapaseva param jyotir bhagavatam adhokshajam, that this personality of Godhead, who is difficult to understand, he can be understood by tapasya. And the Bhagavad Gita also, while describing the genuine qualities of a spiritualist, says, Samo damo tapo so cham. Tapo means austerity. So we should not be scared of austerity. We must understand that austerity to the Transcendentalist is the weapon by which he decorates himself. This one understanding must be firmly planted in the mind, in the heart, because we see that this is the greatest stumbling block to spiritual advancement, even of those who take to spiritual life. Even those who take to spiritual life, they fall down only because of one factor. They are scared of austerity. And when one is scared of austerity, then he falls a victim to the senses. Because what is the austerity of the mind? The austerity of the mind is to only think of Krishna. The austerity of the mind is to only think of Krishna's instructions. What is the austerity of the tongue? The austerity of the tongue is to only glorify Krishna and to only taste Krishna prasadam and to completely abstain from prajalpa. This is known as the austerity of the tongue. What is the austerity of the ear? The austerity of the ear is to only hear transcendental subject matters and transcendental glorification of the Lord, and close the ears when you are hearing material songs and mundane music. Mundane music is poison for the Transcendentalist because there are two types of contamination that we have to face. The materialists are only talking about the contamination of the air, isn't it? There is so much emphasis upon environmental control. In almost every country of the world now, they have a department called the Environmental Control Department. The one thing about the materialists is they always use sophisticated technology, sophisticated language. So even if it's something ordinary, they'll come up with very nice phrases to make it look very glorious. So this is called pollution control, is being called environmental control. That is, they want to make sure that the air doesn't get polluted. But worse than, more dangerous than the pollution of the air is the pollution of the sound. This is the verdict of the Bhagavatam. The pollution of the sound is far more dangerous than the pollution of the air. But the materialists are not worried about the pollution of the sound. You don't see any department in any government around the world aim at purifying the sound, isn't it? They're trying to purify the air. Therefore they have these air purifiers and all. But they don't have sound purifiers. Because nobody knows how to purify the sound. It's only the devotees who know how to purify the sound. So this is a big problem in society. The worst problem in society is pollution of the sound. Because if the sound is purified, then the different senses will also become purified. But if the sound is impure, then the senses will also become impure. You cannot deny that. Especially in Kali Yuga. The ears are more important than anything. In Satya Yuga, people could meditate because the desire for sense gratification was also not there in the minds of the people in Satya Yuga. In Satya Yuga, people were not even thinking of sense gratification. Therefore, they could afford to meditate. But in this stage, the desire for sense gratification is always there. So because the desire for sense gratification is so strong in this stage, the pollution, the purification of the sound is the key to purifying the desire for sense gratification. So how do you purify the sound? The sound can be purified only if one is hearing transcendental sound. If you are hearing mundane sound, then the senses cannot be purified because the devotee sees through the ears. The karmi tries to see through the eyes. But the devotee doesn't try to see through the eyes. He tries to see through the ears. Whatever he hears through the ears guides how he is going to act. So, the austerity of the ear is to only hear transcendental sound. And when we hear mundane songs, sometimes we see our devotees are very fond of mundane music and they try and dovetail it. When we hear mundane songs and when we hear mundane music, the sound is becoming contaminated. And if you're living in a contaminated sound, then there's no question of purifying your senses. So the austerity of the ear is, whenever you hear this mundane sound, you must close your ears at once. Hare Krishna.